All right, welcome to day 285 of our Read Through the Bible for 2019. We're going to be in Matthew 14 through 16. Matthew 14, at that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, 'It is not lawful for you to have her.' And though he wanted to put him to death, he feared the people because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, 'Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter.' And the king was sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, 'This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves.' But Jesus said, 'They need not go away. You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish.' And he said, 'Bring them to me.' Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked toward heaven, looked up to heaven, and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. They said, 'It's a ghost.' And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid.' And Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water.' He said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?'" Let's pause right there. Very simple prayer on the part of Peter. Not eloquent, didn't need to know a lot of words, just needed to know he was sinking. And that Jesus was his hope. And so he prays, "Lord, save me." "Well, you have little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." All right, pause there. You'll hear people say, well, Jesus never claimed to be the Son of God. Jesus never claimed to be God himself. Jesus never claimed that we were to worship him. We find multiple times throughout the scriptures where it's recorded that they worshiped Jesus. Now, remember, when people fall down in front of the angels to worship, angels always say the same thing: "Get up, don't worship me. I'm not to be worshiped." Jesus never rebukes anyone who worships him. Never. We see this after the resurrection with Thomas. We see this here with the disciples in the boat. They worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment, and as many as touched it were made well. Chapter 15. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." Ceremonial washing, I'm sure they weren't unsanitary. He answered them, "And why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition?" As Jesus responds, For God commanded, honor your father and your mother. Whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if anyone tells his father or mother, what you would have gained from me is given to God, he need not honor his father. So for the sake of your tradition, you have made void the word of God, you hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you when he said, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. All right, one thing that they were doing, there was certain responsibilities that they held to their fathers. And if you were to say, well, this particular thing that I have or this particular asset is set apart for God, well, then you could maintain that and have it untouchable by your parents so that they couldn't rely upon that until they were gone, and then you could reclaim it. It was a workaround in their responsibilities, and Jesus says, come on now, you use the traditions of men, claim them to be a means of honoring God, but your heart's nowhere near God when you do it. Verse 10, and he called the people to him and said to them, hear and understand, it is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a person. And the disciples came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? He answered, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Let them alone. They are blind guides. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. But Peter said to him, explain the parable to us. And he said, are you still without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is expelled? But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile anyone. And Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, send her away, for she is crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee and went up on the mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others. And they put them at his feet, and he healed them, so that the crowd wondered when they saw the mute speaking, the crippled healthy, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I am unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where are we to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? They said, 7, and a few small fish. And directing the crowd to sit down on the ground, he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 7 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. Those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after sending away the crowds, he got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan. Chapter 16. And the Pharisees and Sadducees came, and to test him, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it, except the sign of Jonah. So he left them and departed. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they began discussing it among themselves, saying, we brought no bread. But Jesus, aware of this, said, oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets you gathered, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many baskets you gathered? How is it that you fail to understand that I did not speak about the bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Remember, in the Old Testament, leaven is considered synonymous with sin, with that which corrupts. The old saying, right? A little leaven leavens a whole lump. Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, which means Simon, son of Jonah. That's why he's referred to as Simon Peter, or just Peter. For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Okay, now, lots of misconstruction here. He uses 2 words. The name for Peter is the word that means a little stone, a small stone. And this is a play on words Jesus used. The rock he's talking about is not Peter. He doesn't say, you are Peter, the little stone, and upon you, little stone, I build my church. Peter's never been the foundation of the church. Jesus is the foundation of the church. He's the chief cornerstone. He says, upon this rock, this immovable boulder, this foundational truth, I build my church. What's the foundational truth? That you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And I tell you, upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. From the time, you notice he didn't strictly charge the disciples to tell no one that Peter was the rock, right? He says, don't tell them I'm the Christ, because that's what we're talking about, because that's the foundation that I'm going to build my church upon. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the 3rd day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. All right. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So he just laid some difficult teaching on them. He just told them that I'm the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is foundational. They said, all right, we believe it, we get it, we understand it. And then he says, and beginning at that time, not before, but at this time, starts to explain to them, I'm going to have to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to have to suffer, and I'm going to have to be killed at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be raised again. And everything they liked about him being the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God, went straight to the back burner, and this was too much. This was unthinkable, unimaginable to them. And we see Jesus calling Peter Satan for trying to hinder him from getting to the cross, because the cross is God's perfect plan. It says you're setting your mind on the things of God, not on the things of God, but on the things of man. He said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, There are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, we need to ask ourselves, what's that mean? When we get to the transfiguration, you'll understand what he's talking about. He's not saying that the ultimate final return of Christ will come during the lifetime of these men. Otherwise, we're all toast. Paul even tells us about that. He says, those who claim that the resurrection's already taken place, that all that's left for those who believe in Christ has been done, and there's nothing that we are looking forward to. Paul rebukes that line of thinking. And so we need to be careful that we don't read that and say, holy smokes, we're going to have to put, with all of the apostles dying within the first century, we've got the last remaining apostle, John, not John the Baptist, he's already died. We read that. But we got John writing somewhere around the book of Revelation, somewhere around 90 AD. With that being the case, did Jesus come in his kingdom in the fullness of what that means in that time? And I would argue that nobody's going to really legitimately from the Bible make that case. So what does it mean? So we're going to see Peter, James, and John, some of them who were with him that day, getting to see a glimpse of the glorified Christ in the transfiguration. We'll get there. And so let's pick up tomorrow with Matthew chapter 17, and we've got 80 days left. So we're moving right along. See you guys tomorrow.